Let's get started now. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for taking the time out from your busy schedule to be here. This is our first webinar in our series of webinars focusing on RPA. I would now like to introduce our host for this webinar, Niladri Panigrahi. Niladri heads the RPA and Digital Transformation Group at V2 Solutions. He is experienced in creating sustainable automation strategy for large-scale enterprises. As a part of his role, Niladri provides automation consulting and execution with focused outcomes for customers across the globe. His hands-on approach for every technology that he has dealt with has helped him witness the evolution of automation over the last 15 years. Just a quick note before I hand over to Niladri. We shall have 5 to 7 minutes of Q&A session at the end of this presentation. So feel free to type your questions using the Q&A section on your screen. We will try to respond to as many questions as possible. But if your question is not answered during this webinar, we will definitely do so over the email. Over to you, Niladri.
Right. Thank you, Aditya. So I still see some people are joining, but in the interest of time, we will continue. So true to the topic, I would solely demonstrate true use cases on RPA that has gone into production without any bias for any platform. There would be no sales talk. However, I would take a minute towards the end to touch upon our services. So before we jump to start, let's have a quick glimpse of the objective of this webinar as to why, what, and how. So why this webinar is unique, as the title has already stated, so there are no hypes, no sales, no biases for any RPA platforms. And what you can expect today? You can expect the approximation of efforts involved for RPA automation, common RPA myths. We have a section for Mythbusters. The key factors that delays overall RPA deployment, and an insight into through the RPA practitioner's view. And how do we plan to accomplish it? So it's going to happen through a detailed walkthrough of 6 live use cases across various industries with details of every effort and challenges involved. All right. So I'm sure you all are aware of RPA as a technology. So thus I won't be talking around introducing the technology. So let's start with our first use case. We call this use case a data consolidation from isolated system. The format for the demonstration of these use cases will be the problem statement followed by the solutions and the behind the scene facts. So the problem statement, an organization had 4 different isolated systems. These are IT systems, but a consolidated report was required with the data points from each of these systems, thereby engaging human resources to manually collate these data by interacting with each systems manually, then presenting the consolidated report for a meaningful insight. Now remember the fact that these were 4 different isolated systems. They were not talking by themselves to each other. It used to take them around 3 hours to create a report of the similar kind. So as a RPA solution, we deployed a bot. On the left-hand side of this diagram, these are the 4 different systems that you have. That was a backup system. Second one was a disk space management system. Third was application monitoring. And the 4th one is ping monitor systems, right? So the bot was engaged to extract data from 4 of this system, while the top 2 systems could give out the data over an email in a CSV and Excel format that the bot could listen through and extract the email content from them. For the rest of the 2 systems, the bot manually got into each of the system by itself and extracted the data for the day. Once all the 4 data points from these systems were brought in, there were nearly 20 to 30 business rules applied over those data to create an Excel output. And that report, what eventually sent out to the customer. Now let's look into what exactly was the outcome of this. There were nearly 90% of the time set, and the accuracy was nearly 100%. Now coming to the behind the scene, which are the 5 buckets, what actually happened inside this. So as you can see, these 5 buckets over here, the requirement bucket consists of all the time it took to bring all stakeholders involved in the process through a walkthrough call, then to study the existing process, document the edges of the process, doing feasibility of RPA, getting accesses of involved systems for the developer and the robot, and finally making the infrastructure available. That was part of the requirement bucket, and it took nearly 6 days. And these are all true experience of ours. Maybe there could have been more optimized output over a period of time, but these are the true cases. So the development part is self-explanatory, whereas the UAT is where the business actually tests the robots. In case of development, in this case, it took us 8 days. Remember, it's not only the development, it's the development as well as the unit testing involved by the development team, right? So the development was for 8 days. The user acceptance testing was for around 4 days, where all the business users who are looking into, who are manually doing this thing, are taking part to see the robots under different stress cycles, how it performs. Now, the most interesting part over here is the block state. The block state presents the number of days the work could not proceed since the development was started. This is a very important factor as it impacts the overall delivery timeline. In our experience, the block state is primarily contributed by few of the following areas, like delay in access to the systems for developers or the robots, unavailability of the stakeholders to clarify processes midway, unavailability of enough test data to cover broad range of scenarios for testings. Now, the last and the interesting part over here is the communication thread. This is the count of clarifications and follow-ups posted to accomplish this automation between the members. This will vary from org to org based on the RPA process of maturity. But the important point here is the automation requires extensive communication between multiple stakeholders, which includes also the business. You will also witness the fact that the communication thread in specific cases dramatically increased in proportion to the number of days in the block state. That tells the story that throughout the life cycle of this automation, there were things that were discovered over a progressive manner. All right. So that was the first use case. Let's jump into the second one. Order prioritization report for distribution department. This involved the distribution department for a large manufacturing, the department was not getting the pending shipment report, which it's a report which is created for all the shipment which is pending, and the report was not being generated on time, which was resulting in delayed shipment of consignments and underutilized shipping capacity. The team responsible for creating this report was running short of time due to the complexity involved and the multiple sources of the data that was coming in. So here came the RPA solution in the form of a robot again. So what we did, we deployed a robot that would log into the SAP system. By the way, every time you deploy a robot acts like a human, like it has its own credentials, like the human has its own username and password. So they also have their own credentials that has to be configured into them. So the robot would log into the SAP system, download the reports for multiple warehouses, right? Because the pending shipment report comes from different warehouses. It then merges the reports to a single Excel sheet and executes further business rules every time. So this is the most biggest value add that every time robot does is that you define more and more business rules that a human would have performed. It can do business rules over a large set of data. Finally, the robot filters the format and the data and sends the report and email to the distribution department. So it was nearly a 40 hours saved per month, and the reports get sent well in time. So it was executed on SAP version 6 with a module SAP module MM. Time saved was nearly 90% with 100% accuracy. Now let's look into the background of it. The requirement time for this was nearly 2 days. 13 days were spent into the development, 9 days into UAT, 4 days into the blockage. Remember why this was a case where we got around 1.5 day into blockage, detailing out the format of the shipment report, because we found that some of the warehouses were sending out templates or formats which was not as per the standard format, so they had to be revisited, and that's why the block is around 35 communication threads were reported from this automation. Please make a note of this very particular thing, that whenever we say this is a blockage doesn't mean that people were just sitting idle, and that it's a blockage whenever there is a pipeline of automations happening, the developers jumps into the next available project for him to work on. So most of the team is engaged always with 2 or 3 different processes in a cyclic manner. So it's not necessarily blockage means no one is working at that point of time. All right. Let's move on to the third. Whenever you have question, please do type into the Q&A section. We will be reading through those questions, few of those questions at the last, or else we'll respond back in the mail as stated earlier. Automated timesheet entry into SAP HCM. The problem statement. The client was another manufacturing unit where the client was releasing payment to all its vendor based on the time entered into their SAP system, right? It's typical timesheet systems. A team responsible for entering the data in SAP from Excel files always faced time crunch, affecting the accuracy of the data and causing the compliance issues. Now, what was happening over here, there were so many different types of vendors, and many of the vendors had adapted different types of timesheet. Now, as pre-process to this, we standardized the format of the timesheet, and then we brought in the deployment, because it's always advisable that you should be deploying automation or your reports never on a broken process, right? So that's why a little bit of straightening before the process we brought in the robots. So a robot was deployed to read through emails from each of these vendors. On receiving emails with the timesheet with the actual attached, robot logs into SAP and starts entering the data into the timesheet module. There were chances that there will be errors that would be encountered because the way the data has been put in into the Excel, or the SAP gives out an error. In that case, the robot will capture a screen of what error occurred for which the process couldn't proceed further also. Eventually, the data is entered into the SAP, which resulted in nearly 45 hours a month of time saving and it was eventually deployed to multiple geographic location by the manufacturing unit, right? So it was an implementation on SAP 6.0 for HCM module with the T code SCAT2, nearly 90% time saved and 100% of accuracy. Let's look into the background. So the requirement took us nearly 4 days. As I stated earlier, we did some standardizations of the timesheets over here. And it took us nearly 6 days of development, 3 days in UAT, 2 days of blockage. And it's probably the lowest of the thread over here that there were 15 communication that happened between the stakeholders who were part of this operation. Now, that was the case number 3. To remember, how do we get this data? We track all our efforts from inception till executions of a process automation through our Jira Agile tracking system, which is complemented through our RPA DevOps, which consists of multiple tools, starting with the version management, continuous integrations, and deployment to various environments, right? So now to break the monotony of these use cases after 3, let's get to see here's a little refresher with my myth buster, what I will call is the myth versus the fact. This is all about the general thinking versus the reality of the RPA world. All right. And these are from our experience. In the interest of time, I won't take much of I won't read through many of those, probably take few of those. So the number one, Business user is the RPA developer. The platform claims so. Isn't that true? So this has been the most talked about topic with most of our clients who think that it's always the business users who can always jump in to do the development. The true fact is that the RPA developer is anyone with a reasonable software development experience, maybe a business user, but we have felt that if you have your RPA practice, that it should be initiated through a group of actual developers who might be the business users, but they should have hands-on experience with scripting in the past. Or else the robots initially do work, but they are not optimized. Eventually, they get into a much bigger problem at later stage, right? Let's look into the third point. Let's automate this. It's quick and easy. It's a very popular saying. So in our experience, not all processes qualify for RPA. The qualification rate is less than 30 to 40% in our experience. So that means if you identify within your organization around 10 cases for RPA, if you do the feasibility really well, you will find that probably 3 or 4 are the case that can be implemented as an RPA at that point of time. The rest can be, probably you might have to do more processing of the, you have to do more straightening of the process before you can truly bring in the robots. Second last, we are considering RPA for our invoice and document processing. Okay, that's been a very, very talked of debatable topic over here. So I must state that RPA is a facilitator for document processing. So most robots or most platforms make use of the third-party engines to do the document conversion. Robots by itself, they do not do the document conversion. For an example, there are many third parties like ABEs, and there are many cloud hosting offerings at this point who are doing the document conversions, where the robots are actually engaged to take the operations forward, right? So the actual conversion of unstructured data to the structured data is not truly part of the RPA as of today. Whereas I hear that many of the leading platform providers are coming up with their own engines which can do the document conversion at this point, but not at this point of time. All right, let's move on to the next use case from our group of 6. Movie title availability check. This was for a different industry altogether, and it's for a digital media company which had to keep track of their movies availability for sale across various digital platforms. So this was an exercise critical to plug any revenue loss due to this movie's unavailabilities. However, the process was manual and cumbersome with multiple platforms and formats, legal conditions to check for different countries, and lastly, keeping the track of every check with timestamp. Right. So this came as an RPA solution with the deployment of a robot. So the robot was programmed to listen to mails for a specific inbox. An Excel sheet containing the list of movie titles and the release year and the store name is sent to the robot. On receiving the email with the Excel attached, robot logs into individual digital stores and starts searching for the title. It matches the year if multiple results are found for the title. Like, it tries to match up with the year if there are multiple results with the same movie name, right? If the exact title is found, it grabs the pricing from that page, takes a screenshot of the whole page and stores it in our cloud system. The finding is then updated in the Excel sheet, which is then emailed back to the user at the end of the process. Now, in between, though it sounds easy, in between there are around 20 to 30 business rules applied on what to do, what not to do, right? What actually it resulted in? It resulted in the time set nearly 90%. Obviously, the accuracy was nearly 100%. On the digital sales platform that we are working on with the robots were for Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and others, right? And let's look into what was the behind-the-scenes situation. This being the robot, as it was deployed for multiple digital platforms, so each platform had their own interface. So the requirement time was higher over here just because the interface had to be studied before finding out how many clicks, how many types, character typing was required before the result was being displayed. So 12 days went into the requirement. There were 15 days of development, this was actually developed for around five platforms. And there were 4 days in UAT testing. Please take a note that there are multiple groups involved into this 4 days of UAT testing on this at the same time. So that's the reason the UAT numbers were. Now there were 45 communication thread over here. You can relate this to the 12 days of requirement over here, just because there was a requirement and there overlap of requirements from the business and they were varying from platform to platform. So the number of communication threads has increased. So this is a direct linkage from the requirement to the communication thread number. Now let's move on to the next slide. I believe we are running right on time on this. New hire onboarding. So this is a HR specific use case where the problem statement was the HR of a large organization had to verify details of the new hires through mail exchange for over 300 new hires per week during the peak hiring season. It was cumbersome as the documentation varied with the different positions. Also, each detail had to be entered into the HRMS system. So now let me explain more of the problem statement with this RPA solution diagram over here. So these were actually documents being sent out to the new hires to fill out and send it back to the HR so that their details are registered into the HRMS system, right? So what we did was that we deployed the robot, which was listening to a mail ID, and this mail ID actually opened up with an Excel sheet with it. That Excel sheet contained details of the complete new hire, their email IDs, their position, and other things, right? The robot could read through this Excel sheet and compose mail with the templates, attaching the templates to it, and send out to each of these hires. So these new hires filled out these attachments, send it back to the robot email ID again. Robot could download each of their documents, validate whether they were right or wrong. If content were right, the data was being updated to the HRMS system and flagged up for human intervention or for the HR to take it over from there, right? If the document were found to be having certain issues, the robot would resend mail out back again, saying that there are XYZ fields that need to be refilled again, right? And the cycle will keep going till the time the actual documents with right data is received. This really helped us save tremendous time, and the accuracy was nearly 80%. The 20% variation was because of at times the format or the content of the document changing, and that leading to certain issues with the robot not able to read the data points, right? And let's look into the background of this. There was a 4 days of requirement with a 10 days of development time. 3 days went into the UAT, and there was a 3 days blockage and about 25 communication threads, 25 communication threads into it. All right, now let's look into our last use case. Event-based updates from Salesforce. As the title states, so this was all about taking updates from the Salesforce. So a project win for an organization is typically marked as an opportunity closure within the Salesforce CRM that leads to a series of manual and time-consuming updates to multiple systems within organization for the purpose of project creation, contract archival, revenue projection updates, and simple notification to key stakeholders. At times, a broken flow leads to an isolated system going out of sync, right? So there are multiple systems involved over here, and Salesforce being the original source of the data. Whenever there is a closure that happens inside it, the data must be flowing into the other systems. So this is where we implemented a robot. So the robot was deployed to monitor Salesforce dashboard for any opportunity closure, right? So the robot will constantly keep monitoring for opportunity closures on the Salesforce interface. On detecting a closure, robot gets into the details page. So robot has its own email login ID into Salesforce and gets into the details page and extracts the opportunity name, date, salesperson involved, the projected revenue, etc., and downloads the files, which are typically like contract, presentations, etc. Robot then logs into the SharePoint and PMS, that's the project management system, to post each of these data separately for project creation, then uploading the file. The SharePoint portal then generates a unique URL for that project, right? Typically, the SharePoint creates that the unique URL for the project. Robot then sends out the mail to key stakeholders with the SharePoint URL. So the human intervention of getting into the system for creation of the project, contract archival, and the project other related updates was really taken care by the robot by simply exposing the SharePoint URL, which has already created the project with all details from inside Salesforce. Now, that took us a requirement for around 5 days. That was around 10 days of development, 2 days into UAT. 6 days went into blockage. I will explain what exactly where the blockage over there. So the blockage over there happened just because there were the SharePoint interface had to be unified. In certain cases, the SharePoint had different interfaces for project creation, whereas it had some different interfaces and for some other purposes. So we unified the SharePoint interface so that the robot makes it, it becomes easier for the robot to navigate through the pages. And that led us to a blockage that was only discovered in between the development. Around 33 communication thread that went into actually into developing this workflow automation. All right. So now let's one second here. With the closure of this RP use cases, let's have a glimpse at our services that we have been looking at right now. Our competency highlights, we are into the SAP and web domain of expertise on RPA, implementing partners for the leading RPA platforms with a large pool of certified RPA developers. We have had so far 170 plus robotic workflows in production that has resulted in 20,000 plus man hours saving, and we have had nearly 120,000 successful transactions so far. Quick look at our services. 3 on the broader perspective. Consulting, development, support. Our consulting services on RPA is all about making the key decisions for your POCs, the COE setup, and the process setup, whereas the development is all about the development, where we look into the development of workflows, coding standard checklists, setting up ticketing systems, monthly business review meetings. And the support part is all about bot, where we look into your bots for their deployment, the monitoring, and the analysis. With this, we come to the last part of the webinar, and over to Aditya.
Thank you very much, Niladri. So with this, we come to the last part of this webinar, that is the Q&A session. So I'll just go through the questions that we have received over the webinar, and we will start taking them one by one. All right, so let us start with the first question. This comes from Ricardo. So Niladri, the question that Ricardo is asking is, how is the overall process of document conversion is managed in RPA?
All right, thanks Ricardo for that question. I will, as I stated, that's a little debatable, but I would make an attempt. So firstly, RPA is not a tool for document conversion. The core engine for document conversion, such as invoices, are handled through third-party services like AB or any custom-built tools by most of these RPA platforms. The robots interact with these tools to retrieve the data to take the operations forward, whereas the tools actually do the job of data conversion from unstructured to structured data. There are broadly two groups of document conversion tools in the market as of today, namely template and non-template based tools. While the template-based tools work great where you have fixed format documents, for an example, in case all your invoices have a very similar structure, then that's the case of a template-based conversion. Whereas the non-template-based tools can be good for a variety of invoices, irrespective of the position of the data elements. So it's a big topic for discussion, but both these type of tools have had limited success and have their own set of limitations. Thus, careful assessment for your document conversion need is very important before you can decide on the type of tools to work alongside your robots, right? I hope that answers your question.
All right, thank you, Niladri. So moving on to the next question. We have this question from Anita, where she has noticed that development time for some of the processes is relatively high. Any comments on that, Niladri?
Okay, Anita, well, that's a nice observation. Let me tell you, the development time doesn't involve the configuration of the process, but a large part of it goes into the unit testing of the process as well, right? At times, the unit testing time is more just because there's a lot of combination of the data that needs to be tested through with the robots. One needs to test multiple scenarios and even the same scenario multiple times to see if any unwarranted screens, pop-ups, messages are appearing on the screen, which the robot needs to tackle, right? And since the processes that are automated are long-running processes, developers end up spending good amount of time in testing also. So it's not only development, it's development plus unit testing, right? So that's why you might be seeing things little high. But if you have to divide it only specific to the development, only the core of the development, then it's going to be much lesser than.
Thanks, Niladri, for that. The next question I'm seeing is from Mitch. He's asking, what happens if the website or application that we have automated changes? Will it not cause the robot to fail? Niladri?
That's right. One of the things to check while in requirement phase is to get a buy-in of the owners of different applications involved in the automations, right? They are the ones who know if applications are going to be upgraded or revamped, even scrapped for one in a very short while. So process automation for such cases should be put on hold in order to avoid robots' failure. But to answer your question specifically, the robot will fail if any of the underlying applications involved in the automation changes. Robot will have to be reconfigured in order to handle such changes. All right. So I believe in the interest of time, we will be responding back to further questions over email.
Right. So thank you, Niladri, for answering all those questions. Everyone, I have just triggered a poll and you should see it on your screen right now. Your feedback would really help us improve the overall experience of our upcoming webinars as well. So please provide your inputs on the webinar. We'll really appreciate that. And once again, big thank you to all of you for joining in. And we look forward to seeing you soon at the next webinar on our other exciting topics. Till then, goodbye and have a great day ahead.
Once again, thank you everyone and have a great day or a great night. Bye-bye.